At the ASCO 2021 GU Symposium, I'm presenting updating results of the IMvigor130 study. In April of 2017, atezolizumab received accelerated approval by the FDA, as well as approval in some other regions in the world for the first-line treatment of patients with metastatic urothelial cancer who are, quote-unquote, ineligible to receive cisplatin-based chemotherapy. We know that patients with metastatic urothelial cancer in general are older, oftentimes have comorbidities, and so there's been a desire to develop treatment regimens for first-line treatment of patients with metastatic disease that might be better tolerated than cisplatin-based chemotherapy. Of course, carboplatin-based therapy filled that void for a while, but is associated with also some unfavorable toxicities, and the durable responses seem to be less than with cisplatin-based chemotherapy. So this was an unmet need that was filled in 2017 with the approval of atezolizumab in that space. That approval was an accelerated approval, at least in the United States, based on a single-arm study, the IMvigor210 study, which showed that in patients with metastatic urothelial cancer who were, quote-unquote, cisplatin ineligible, atezolizumab was associated with an objective response rate of 24%, but many of those responses were quite long, and given that, plus the favorable safety profile, atezolizumab received accelerated approval. That led to a few questions. One question was, is atezolizumab better than carboplatin-based chemotherapy, which was the older standard in that patient population? The second was, is atezolizumab better than chemotherapy in general? Should it replace cisplatin-based chemotherapy as well? And the third question was, if we have these two pillars of treatment, platinum-based chemotherapy and immune checkpoint blockade, should we be giving these drugs together? So that led to the design of the IMvigor130 study, which was a large international 3-arm randomized phase 3 study that randomized patients to atezolizumab monotherapy, platinum-based chemotherapy plus atezolizumab, and platinum-based chemotherapy could either be cisplatin-based or carboplatin-based based on the investigator discretion according to the patient's characteristics, or it could be platinum-based chemotherapy alone. There was a hierarchical statistical analysis plan employed such that the chemotherapy plus atezo combinations first had to show benefit versus chemotherapy before the monotherapy versus chemotherapy arms could be formally tested. So right now we have interim results and we have a non-formal analysis because of that structure. That said, we've previously seen interim results for atezolizumab monotherapy compared to platinum-based chemotherapy in patients with high PD-L1 expressing tumors, that is in all comers, in patients with PD-L1 expression at the 2 to 3 level. And in this subset of this study, atezolizumab is associated with a hazard ratio of 0.68 compared to platinum-based chemotherapy for overall survival. At the ASCO GU Symposium, for the first time, we're seeing the results in the subset of these patients, which is atezolizumab monotherapy versus carboplatin-based chemotherapy in patients who have tumors with high PD-L1 expression. Remember, that is the current FDA label for atezolizumab in this space. And so this is really the first look at comparative data, atezolizumab versus carboplatin-based chemotherapy, according to what is technically the label for atezolizumab right now. So this subset involved 50 patients randomized to atezolizumab, 43 randomized to chemotherapy. So it's a small subset of this large randomized study. The objective response rate was 38% with atezolizumab, 33% with chemotherapy. And the hazard ratio for overall survival in this subset was 0.53 with confidence intervals of 0.3 to 0.9. And so certainly major caveats, small subset, exploratory, but this is the first randomized data addressing this question, which is technically the labeled indication for atezolizumab right now. And it certainly reinforces that label in terms of atezolizumab in biomarker-defined patients who are cisplatin ineligible, potentially being associated with favorable outcomes relative to carboplatin-based chemotherapy. The next steps with this research are a moving target, and I say that because the field, since this trial was designed and read out, continues to evolve, and that's certainly promising given the lack of new therapies and the lack of advances in the clinic in urothelial cancer for many decades. And now we're seeing a number of new drugs approved with distinct mechanisms of action, and those therapies are being moved earlier and earlier in the course of treatment. So now we have a number of treatment strategies, in the role for upfront immune checkpoint blockade monotherapy in biomarker-defined patients is in evolution and will depend in part on the readout of some pending phase 3 studies that might evolve the treatment landscape further within the next year.